participating with great enthusiasm to this, this event that once again is giving us the possibility to reflect on important themes. And that's the reason why I would say that on behalf of our chairman, the President Mario Mattioli, that is the chairman of the Federazione del Mare Italian Maritime Cluster, we are very proud today to host the event dedicated to underwater borders and state domains. I would say just that this issue is probably the themes of, I would say not the year, but probably because every week there is an event, there is a seminar, conference dealing with this, the theme of underwater and all the, let's say, and its countless phases. Today, with a very distinguished panel, we will discuss on the legal, but also the economic aspect of this new frontier. We will do it with, in particular, with the Dottoressa Caracciolo. Dottoressa Caracciolo, I think you need no presentation. You are one of the most distinguished experts concerning legal aspect concerning the underwater theme, and we will do also with Emanuele Panero. You are an analyst to the defense decks and safety of CESI. And we will do so also with Mr. Alfonso Giordano. You are the professor of geography and political economy at the University Luis Guido Carli in Roma. So without any further ado, I think I will give the floor to our first speaker, Mrs. Caracciolo, and in order to have your thoughts concerning the legal aspect, how this underwater, this new frontier is the governance of this new frontier. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I'm very delighted to be here. I apologize for my voice, but I spent last week in a very cold weather, and the effects are now on my voice, nose, and so on. Well, for an expert, a scholar in international law of the sea, and a judge of an of the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, which has an exclusive jurisdiction on issues connected with water and underwater issues. Terms, the title, underwater borders and state domains leads immediately to two pillars. On the one side, the continental shelf, and including the outer margin of the continental shelf, and on the other side, the deep seabed area, so an area managed and ruled according to some principles which cannot be considered as domain. So let me start by telling you that when we speak about state domain on the land territory, we face one main concept: sovereignty. So that power owned by states to impose commands in a certain area towards the entities, individuals, or legal entities living there. If we go at sea, the scenario is completely different. Domains, the term domain can be declined in many different ways. I indicated some of them: sovereignty in internal waters and territorial sea, including the underwater therein. And this sovereignty in internal waters and in territorial sea doesn't overlap. We have different kinds of sovereignty. Then we have another declination of domain, which is control. In some area, the contiguous zone, states can exercise only control, including in the underwater territory, in the soil and subsoil. And then we have sovereign powers. The terms utilized the term sovereign powers is utilized in the continental shelf and in the exclusive economic zone. But we have not finished yet, because we have another declination of domain, which is jurisdiction. Then you see how articulated is the concept of domain concerning the maritime spaces. I always say we cannot, when we deal with human activities on the land, territory, we need just to know where the state where this activity is conducted. At sea, it doesn't work like that. We need to know the place, the location, plus the kind of activities. And then look at the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is that constitution of the oceans, as it is commonly called, which in a very detailed manner establishes different domains in different areas concerning different activities. Just to give you an example, a short one, continental shelf, since we are speaking about underwater borders, coastal state has sovereign powers to explore and exploit the natural, biological or not, resources on the seabed. But it has jurisdiction for the platform, for islands, artificial islands. So don't think that sovereign powers mean jurisdiction, or control means jurisdiction, or jurisdiction means sovereignty. No. These terms have been chosen because with the intention to clarify the specific powers that coastal states can exercise in certain areas. So I must say that one of the most common mistakes from those not being jurists is to consider, to utilize the term jurisdiction for everything. For the continental shelf, for the exclusive economic zone, for internal waters, in that case it is correct, for the territorial sea, where it is correct, but partially, because it is a limited sovereignty. So, At the same time, if we think about what isn't state domain, so if we think about the opposite concept, because we were taught at the university that we have sovereignty at sea versus freedom at sea, so that we have these two blocks facing one to the other, we discover that also on the side of freedom, we don't have simply freedom, but we have a less complicated structure, legal structure, but still we have many things on this other side. Freedom, of course, freedom of navigation, but we have also duties upon states. Just to mention one, protection of the marine environment. It's not a full freedom. If we think about freedom, we think about the possibility for a state to do whatever it wants. It's not like that. The freedom is freedom for certain activities, but it is along with freedoms of navigation, of laying cable, or freedom of fishing, and so on, there are many duties. Duties connected to the protection of common interest, the sustainable development of fish species. Fishing, the freedom of fishing cannot be freedom, a full freedom, because the resources will be exhausted shortly and some species will disappear, with effect affecting all states, especially coastal states, but also landlocked states. Think about the protection of the marine environment. The International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea adopted an advisory opinion on the effect of climate change, so of something which happens in the atmosphere, in the seas and oceans. And the effects are really deleterious, and the tribunal interpreted many duties upon states to protect the marine environment and its resources against pollution, but not only, also the other deleterious effect by greenhouse gases produced by man. And this freedom is not, again, a real full freedom, because each freedom must be exercised taking into account the freedoms of the other state. So this is, of course, a limitation, again, because this expression on which the tribunal, but also other international judges have a lot elaborated, taking into due regard the interest of other states, means that the freedom must meet at a certain point the other freedoms in order to allow each state to enjoy the right recognized by the Convention. And last but not least, if the regime of freedom characterized the water column on the high seas, underwater we don't have anymore any freedom. We have another completely different principle ruling the resources of the deep seabed areas, which is the principle of common heritage of mankind. Here, I'm simplifying a lot, of course. Behind each of these principles there are a lot of articles, a lot of case law, and so on. common heritage of mankind, this principle puts away completely the state individually considered. At the center of the international seabed authority system, of the exploration and maybe in the future exploitation of the resources, the mineral resources. About the biological, there is less knowledge. They are rather unknown, still unknown, notwithstanding scientific development in that field. The idea, at the center, we have the international community as a whole, which is represented by the International Seabed Authority, and which is authorized to explore and exploit the resources in the area, not for the single interest of each state, but for the interest of the international community as a whole. So there is a mechanism, a very clever mechanism of distribution of the advantages obtained from the exploration and exploitation. It can be directly the mineral resources, but it can be also the sharing of the financial outcomes, with very detailed rules which depict different categories of state. So land minerals producing states, less developed states, consumer states, I mean states consuming the mineral resources of the area. So you see, we have to deal while working on the law of the sea, legally speaking, deal with many different, with a variety of domain. And we must be very careful to maintain clarity in our minds in order not to apply one category of domain or one category of freedom in the wrong place to the wrong activities. There is then a second problem. This is the second term I want to speak about with you, borders. Because we have underwater domain on one side and underwater borders. Well, again, if we think about the land territory, think that international law hasn't, so far, elaborated many rules on how to delimit the state territory. We don't have customary rules, we don't have treaty rules. We can say that maybe one rule for delimiting the state territory exists, which is, I'll mention it, but it's a very difficult concept, the so-called uti possidetis iuris principle, which is a principle which was applied for decolonization, but also when former Yugoslavia disgregated in the single state we have now, Slovenia, Croatia, and so on. Maybe only this principle, which is a principle aimed at guaranteeing stability of borders. Then states defined their borders, their terrestrial borders, how they preferred, sometimes in the past using the force, which was lawful, sometimes agreeing with the neighbor state. Again, different scenario in the law of the sea. Here, the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea contains many norms on delimitation. And we have a rich case law by the International Court of Justice and by the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea and by arbitral tribunals dealing with delimiting underwater maritime spaces, including underwater maritime spaces. And I will say this is a never-ending story, specifically for underwater borders. In that regard, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea contains, so for the exclusive economic zone and for the continental shelf, contains a rather vague rule which imposes to state to delimit through agreements in order to obtain an equitable result. These are the exact expression utilized by the relevant rule. But what does it mean, equitable result? An agreement is always equitable. If two states agree, the treaty is okay for them. So this addition that the agreement in itself is not equitable, but the result must be equitable, has given rise to numerous interpretation by scholars and by, of course, courts and international courts and tribunals since the end of the 60s. Everything started with a very famous case, Germany versus Denmark and the Netherlands concerning the continental shelf in the North Sea. Along the years, case law has cleared up perfectly the meaning of equitable result through a method of delimitation, elaborating a method of delimitation in 3 steps. First step, I speak very easily because it's a very complex mechanism, splitting in 2 equal pieces, as much as it is possible, the maritime zones concerned, continental shelf and or EEZ, exclusive economic zone. Then, second step, controlling whether there are special circumstances, islands, peninsulas, for example, deep indented coast, which should be taken into account. Usually we don't have linear coast, like a wall. We have many geographical features, rather strange or peculiar. If this is the case, the tribunal or court modifies the delimitation, the so-called equidistance line, the splitting into parts, in order to adapt the equidistance line to the reality, geographical reality on the ground. Then, third step, third control, which is disproportionality test. What does it mean? To check if this new delimitation line is proportionate to the length of both coastal states involved. If I have a small island and a big state, small island with a small coastal length and a big state which have 8 times a longer maritime facade, it would not be equitable to give them more or less equal continental shelf. So I have to modify the equidistance line, and then I have to check if after this modification the equitable result is reached or not. You think that I'm repeating silly, boring things, but unfortunately, if I go in internet and I search in the web, I found, and I always become very angry about that, find the limitation line of the continental shelf in the Mediterranean Sea according the equidistance line. Italy is the most damaged country in this reconstruction. I don't know why. Politicians, governments, I don't know. They don't know this long-standing case law, which is shared by all international tribunals. It's not a case law which is contrasted by judges, but each of them, I remember a declaration by the Italian judge, Judge Treves, who seated many years ago in the tribunal. Each tribunal put its contribution in a spirit of cooperation. But however, outside the legal world, notwithstanding this is something undisputed, uncontested, extremely well established, I still see that Mediterranean Sea is crossed by equidistance line as the final result, which is not, cannot be, is a big mistake, cannot never ever be a final result. I hope that speaking about that, someone outside the world of the jurist will understand that. And to conclude, we jurists thought at a certain point that everything could have been said and written about borders, underwater borders, was said. So indeed, nobody of us wrote anymore about delimiting the continental shelf, because, as I told you, this is a res facta. Nothing can be added, can be described, a new case, a new judgment, but that's all. And what must be done is to let the other world, the world outside, know that equidistance line is not the line. But we were mistaken. We were mistaken because in these more recent years, a new problem emerged from the underwater world. The problem of the delimitation, the extension first, and the delimitation then of the outer continental shelf. Some states, the continental shelf is a geographical concept for the law of the sea, 200 nautical miles, and something different, but I won't enter on that. If a state is sufficiently lucky to have geologically a longer continental shelf, beyond 200 nautical miles, well, it can apply to a body unknown to the majority of the outer world, which is called Commission on the Limits of the Outer Continental Shelf, which establishes whether this extended continental shelf is really geologically and geographically an extension of the land territory. So it's a very difficult application because states have to produce many geological scientists' documents, very expensive one. They need to do many surveys and to have scientists on their side. Is it not a case that the first state which presented an application many years ago was Russia? Think that the analysis of this documentation is so difficult and lengthy and time-consuming that nowadays the Commission takes 20 years to arrive to the outcome if this continental shelf is really the geological prolongation or not. So what states did? They asked the tribunal, notwithstanding the absence of a pronunciation, a recommendation by the Commission, to delimit their hypothetical extended continental shelf. Waiting for the Commission to decide the external limits, states thought, well, we can ask the delimitation. Extension and delimitation doesn't correspond really. And courts and tribunals started to do that. The International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, in a very famous case, Bay of Bengal, the ICJ in Somalia versus Kenya, another very famous case, and most recently in one of the longest, an Annex 7 tribunal in a case, Mauritius versus Maldives, and finally, the International Court of Justice in a very famous case which lasted 20 years, Nicaragua versus Colombia. And what did happen? It happened that the judges split. So we don't have a final outcome. For the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, the delimitation is possible any case, save in case of very uncertain geological condition. So it is also possible to delimit not only two outer continental shelf, but also a continental shelf and an outer continental shelf, or an exclusive economic zone and an outer continental shelf, creating something called gray zones. On the contrary, the ICJ, in this case, which was adopted some months ago, refused to do that, and sustained that it is impossible to delimit the continental shelf of a state with the outer continental shelf of another state. It's impossible to mix up the kind of state underwater domain. This ICJ decision was very criticized. The judges of the ICJ themselves appended a lot of dissenting opinions. You know that international judge can write a declaration and dissenting opinions and something in between. And because of a very, it was considered superficial interpretation of states' practice in that field. So you see, we had closed a door, the borders concerning underwater state domain for the continental shelf, but a new door was open concerning the outer continental shelf. And this is a problem not only for single state interest, but also for the international community, because beyond the outer continental shelf, there is the deep sea bed, and therefore the common heritage of mankind, the interest of the entire international community. Thank you.
Thank you
very much indeed for this very comprehensive and enlightening presentation. Really, you set the legal scene of UNCLOS 1982, and I think this was very important from the outset, from the very beginning, in order to pave the way to this conversation and with the other speakers. You made it almost crystal clear crystal. What is by definition very, very complex, but I think that this was very important from the very beginning. But without any further ado, I will give the floor to Edward Mura. Edward Mura, you are the president of Commonwealth Club of Roma, director of the Australian Business Network, and with me today you will co-moderate this meeting. So please, up to you for a few words and give the floor to our next speakers. Edward.
Thank you, Lorenz. Yes, as a chairman of the Commonwealth Club with 56 countries, most on the sea and islands, including my very own Australia, we are very interested in this argument, and I confirm it was very interesting to hear the first speaker simplify what is a very complicated area of law, simplify as much as one can. But I think as we go through our speakers, we will benefit by different approaches, obviously covering the same area, but it'll all, by the end of today, it all should be much clearer to all of us. I'm a lawyer as well, and I can say that it's not easy to grasp all these materials and understand the effect of the cases and what actually happens between countries. We have here today, I'll just take this opportunity before passing to our next speaker to say that we have here today, on one side we have a number of countries represented by various embassy officials, some military, some economic, and of course there will be an opportunity later for interaction between yourselves and our speakers. And on the other hand, and it's always welcome at these events, we have a whole range of students who are studying these materials, and therefore they're probably going to bombard our speakers with questions, so get ready. Without further ado then, I'll introduce the next speaker, which is Alfonso Giordano, a professor of political geography at one of my alma maters, the Lewis University. Welcome, Alfonso.
Thank you. I don't know if you can hear me because the light is not on. Okay, thank you. So first of all, let me thank the Festival Diplomacy to invite me. Thank you to Giorgio Bartolimucci and his crew. And of course, we are in this wonderful seat. And I just told you that you are very lucky to work in this kind of environment. So thank you again. I'll try to explain how we geographers work on this kind of subjects, why this is important. This is quite obvious, of course, and the framework in which we work and the problem we face in the demarcation of line underwater. And of course, I will launch some of the topics maybe important for the future discussion also with you. So first of all, why a very quiet observation, a difference between the land and the water. Land is very easy to demarcate. We just put a line on the water, on the land, and these lines are full of boats sometimes because there are war around these lines. With water, of course, and the underwater is completely different because the underwater is not so easy to demarcate, which is a very obvious observation. And of course, they are not habitated, and are very complex to habitate. Of course, we have now technology for this, but this is still a place with no ecumene. It's an unecumenic place, so it's very difficult to demarcate. The other problem is that, by the way, also with this difficulty, the underwater borders are very important. Underwater borders, it's not a new thing. It's a very old concept. It's born I refer also to the friend of with Federico about geopolitics. One of the first most important geopolitical theorists is maritime power. So it's a general admiral, which was the Alfred Mahan. And he said that the sea is not, let's say, a division between people, but should be a connection. Of course, trying to control some route, you know very well maybe the choke points, so control some canal and so on. So it's not new, because the sea, it's one of the best, let's say, point of power for states. If you remember the UK and then now also the United States, the sea is one of the places where you play your power, where you play international economics, where you play your state domain. So underwater boundaries are power geopolitics, by the way. And now, which role for geographers and cartographers? I will not go now in the difference between geographers and cartographers. You know, we work mostly on theories, and cartographers are technicians producing a scientific map with very high competence and difficulties to find data on the water. But by the way, we work on natural features, and we have to stay in international legal framework, producing some maybe scientific data and maps with some geopolitical perspective. And you know, this mixing of geopolitics with scientific data, it's very complex sometimes. By the way, you should know the two main bodies are, if you are interested, are the International Geographical Union and the International Cartographic Association. So this gather all the national bodies working on geography and cartography. So starting with the key concept, nature, law, and technology. Now, nature was just mentioned by Professoressa Caracciolo. One of the first problems is that not only we are under the sea, but geomorphological features are very, very, very complex. Normally, we do what we call seafloor topography. So we have maps that have the description of the underwater. Not all the points, it's not so easy, but we have the confirmation of basins, and on this, maybe we start with the line of boundaries. But there is a problem with the continental shelf mapping, because here we have geopolitics. So we have this topography, but the problem is that the states try to use topography in their interest, in their own interest. So the shelf mapping is very difficult, because you go in some power states with clear interest to map differently the places. The legal framework, of course, all of you know United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, but also we work on the bilateral and maritime boundary treaties. So we have two legal framework of reference, the one international and the one that is normally bilateral, very difficult. But on the legal framework, just let me remember you the UNCLOS. We have, let's say, four main features. Territorial waters, you know very well, we have 12 nautical miles from the coastline, which is your sea. Then you have EEZ, which is the exclusive economic zone, 200 nautical miles from the baseline, which is very critical, because there you can fish, there you can extract mineral, but the navigation is free for all the countries. And then you have the problem with the continental shelf. And also we have to have a difference between island and rock, because islands are a tool for geopolitics in geographical terms, but rock are not. So if you conquer a rock, you conquer nothing about the geopolitics. You have to conquer an island, or you have to build an island. On the UNCLOS, of course, this is not my field, and Professor Caracciolo explained it very well. We have some advance, and we still have some problems, because, you know, international law is not so easy to enforce in some states. When we have maritime boundary treaties, this is not a problem. So states are agree for the borders under waters. The problem comes when we don't have this kind of bilateral conventions. So we have to work on science with some difficulties and also to try to balance between different powers. Which kind of technology we use? Mainly three. The satellite altimetry, and this is very new means last decades. Now we are working also on the exogeography, would be one of the subjects today also in the Festival of Diplomacy, which is to look at the space. And we have new technological advancement that permit us to do so. But also for the sea, we have this satellite altimetry, which is very good because now we have more precise data about the conformation of the underwater. Then we also use multi-beam echo sounders, which is a new high-resolution mapping tool that is very important, and also GIS, the Geographic Information System, that are very useful on the land, but are also on the sea. So we work on the natural features under the national and international framework, legal framework, and we use technology. If this is the discussion, now which are the problems we face? One of the problems, and this was just said by Professor Caracciolo, it's that we have complexity with natural features. This is very complex. Now we know how the underwater is more or less is done, but these features are not easily to manage when you come to geopolitical interest, because we have many examples. One of the most famous is the Arctic Sea. So we have many, let's say, claims by Russia, Canada, Denmark, with the Greenland and Norway. One of the most famous, I can mention you, is Lomonosov Ridge. So you try to extend your power, trying to, let's say, convince other people that your baseline is more extended. But there is another problem, which is the dynamic nature of boundaries, because we have to stay with the change of natures. We have some natural shifting, taking account the sea level rise, the sediment deposition, or tectonic activity. This naturally happen, and with this, you have to change borders. This happens on the land when a river change is built, but in this case, you can more or less easily to determine how you can change your borders according to the change in nature. But when this happens under the sea, it's more difficult. And then also we have now the climate change impacts that also change the geopolitics of underwater, because this is changing, of course, with the ice melting and so on. Then we have also artificial construction. So we can create nature, making what is called, in geographical term, Islandization. We create island, and this is very, maybe you know the case of China creating island in the sea, the China's South Sea, and the Spratly Island. So this is very known. You build island because with the island you have more longer space for claim your territorial waters. And then you have a problem with the energy or with the resources. This is one on the other problem. So the nature is changing, but also the geopolitical of resources is changing. One of the most famous cases is the East Mediterranean gas field, and then you have problem around countries. And also, if you want to apply also the EE zone, this is very difficult because sometimes you don't have enough space. Think about the Adriatic. We have a problem to design this because the space is so limited. And all the problems are technological problem, lingual problem, and legal challenges. One of the problems is that we don't have complete data. Sometimes the data are unclear, all through the satellite detections. So sometimes we have to work on some, let's say, imagining what is happening down there. So it's not completely clear. Now there is a very important project, maybe you know, that is the Seabed 2030 project, which is very important because it's trying under the umbrella of the International Cartographic Association to cover this problem of the, let's say, denomination and also to recognize the data that are not so clear. The other problem is translating data into maps. This has many, many, many phases. First of all, it's a technological problem. It's the old problem we had also in the past to make something that is a globe on a plane, and this is happening also in the other border. This is technical, but now with new technology we are solving this kind of problem. The other problem is, of course, again, the interest, the domain of states there, and we have to produce some scientific maps that are under pressure of nation states. Then we have also some problem with the language barriers. There is a very famous case about Russia, demarcation of toponyms in the sea, under the sea. That was a problem in the international cartography. Now we have this international union of cartographers that are trying to collect all the names. Now, of course, there are many geopolitical and economic implications, and I will launch you some trends maybe to discuss. So the new challenges are the climate change, for sure. This is not an environmental, only an environmental problem. It's a problem also to define how the underwater is changing. We have geopolitical conflicts, and when you come into geopolitics, you lost geography. This is the real problem, because geography is the reality and geopolitics is your reality. And then we have, let's say, another problem or solution with the technological advancement. There is another very important, let's say, fact that is the ocean grabbing. We had the land grabbing, now we have the ocean grabbing. And the ocean grabbing is, let's say, a balance between conservation and interest of states. So we have to find solutions to have conservation on one side, but also to cover national interest. The importance of toponyms. This is very important. When you go in a city, you first look, always you are in Japan it's a bit different, you know, but normally in cities, also Rome is made like this. You are in a part of the city with some kind of characteristics, and this is made by the name of streets. So naming is very important. If you put a name on a map, this place is this place exists. Or if you don't put a name, this place simply does not exist. Of course, it exists in geography, but not exist in geopolitical terms. So toponyms are important for nationalism, are important for geopolitical reasons, are important for economic motivations. And there is also a trend now with the critical geographers in decolonization of old toponyms, because you have to change and to make, let's say, more important indigenous people. So some place of the world where indigenous are very important, to give them the possibility to name as they want these places. But there are also, let's say, very good things that we are doing, I think, which is the oceanographic technology. This is very important. So we have many advancements on this. And there is the international standardization, which is we have common rules how to name, how to detect data, and how to translate this data on the maps. Because maps are, I teach demography and geography. I can tell you, I always repeat to students that I am one of the biggest liars normally. Because with maps and data, you can lie very with statistics. So maps is your imagination of the world. Normally, I suggest them to see the world on the other side, and they look the maps like this because they are used to see the world as is on the maps, but of course it's a completely science fiction. So if you are on the map, if you are on the underwater map, you are existing as a national power. But if you are not there, you are not existing. But so the translation of this data, scientific data, in geopolitical terms on maps is a very important step. And we need a lot of standardization rules about this. And we are doing this. And there is another theory which is called volume geography and wet ontology, which is consider the sea in 3 dimensions, which is very obvious step, but it's not so obvious when you work on maps, on treaties, because treaties normally does not detect this three dimension of the sea. So again, toponyms are very important. Science and geopolitics, I think this is one of the main discussion for geographers, and we'll see if you are agree. And I would like to close with a quote by Daniel Pennac. Daniel Pennac was he's a French essayist, a French writer, of course, origin, the real surname is Pennacchioni, but now he's Daniel Pennac, and he said, it is to fix history that you mess up with geography, which is a very important matter. When you talk about history, which is the geography changing, and you are changing geography in some way. If you have to change geography, you have to be very careful with the geopolitics you are putting on treaties, because this is very clear. Treaties are made also by powers, so it's not always just law, as we would wish. This is a wishful thinking, but normally treaties are also under power of very powerful states. So this was some of the suggestions. Thank you, and please.
Thank you, Professor Giordano. As we heard, dealing with the same matters from a legal point of view and then dealing with from a geographical point of view, we get to see a different facet of sometimes the same argument. And now we're going to look at another facet of that, and that's from the Centro Studi Internazionale. Emmanuel Panero is going to look at the defense and security aspects of these relationships. So,
thank
Emmanuel?
you, first of all, and it's a great pleasure to be in such a prestigious setting with an high-level panel like this one, and really, really, it's a pleasure. That being said, I'm neither a jurist, unfortunately, nor a geographist. I'm a military analyst.
This is the first time I heard this kind of affirmation. Thank you.
That being said, I will look at the underwater borders and state domain perspective from a military analyst perspective. And I believe it's important to start from why we're talking about the underwater. And Professor said it's obvious. Well, my institute motto, the institute where I have the pleasure to work, have a motto, and this motto is the obvious should never be taken for granted. So why we are talking about the underwater? Well, because the underwater is the frontier of the not only human development, but worldwide multi-layered strategic competition. So how we get there and where we're going to be is what I will try to not explain at all, but just to point some dynamics that have led us here and will guide us in the future of underwater. So let's start where we are coming from, passing where we are and where we're going to be in the underwater. Well, the underwater is not new. It's a frontier, has always been a frontier. It's always been a frontier so much that between the 17th and the 18th century, humankind started to try to understand how to reach the underwater. And they usually failed. But in the end, they started to make some progress. And the first progress happened in 1811, when the first underwater cable was laid. It was not under the sea, however. It was under a riverbed, on a riverbed. So it was the first movement to reach the depth and to create infrastructures in the depth. 1850, the next step. By the way, the first underwater cable was for moving energy. It was a power line. Then we came in 1850, the first oil pipeline that connected France with UK. And then in 1862, we started to look at how we can militarize the underwater, or better, how we can employ something underwater that was I'm kind of exaggerating. It was just some centimeter or meters under the surface. It was during the American Civil War, the USS Alligator, the first US Navy submersible. And then we started to develop the underwater. In the 21st century, we registered an exponential development of the underwater. Right now we're talking about, and that's why it matters, 1.4 million kilometers of underwater cables for telecommunication. We started with the telegraph, we passed to the telephone, and now we'll talk about fiber optics telecommunication in some 600 different network lines that cross all over the sea, from international waters to national waters, and that connect all of us. We're talking about around 98% of data and information transferred through internet that pass through those lines. That means, since economy always matter, 9.5 trillion euros are transferred daily through this network. And we are just talking about telecommunication cables, because there are 32,000 kilometers separated in 2,400 different lines of gas and oil pipelines that fuel our economies all around the world. And we do not only have these 32,000 kilometers, there are nearly as much that are deactivated oil and gas underwater pipelines. More, 1.2 million kilometers of power lines in 340 different networks that move electricity through the underwater and connect all over the world. So that's why today it matters. But what has changed is that before, being underwater was being safe. Because let's talk about some data, some more data. The world is 70% water and 30% land, which means that the world is 70% underwater. But we have only mapped with adequate resolution the 24.9% of the underwater. Usually we do not operate under 300 meters. That's usually the lowest negative height that the submarines go. And when we use ROV, that means remotely operated vehicles and so on and so forth, underwater vessels that are remote with autonomous capabilities, so on and so forth, or robotized, we usually arrive around 600 meters. Then obviously we have specific tools to conduct this kind of operations, but we usually operate in this layer. And that means that a great part of the water column, as well as the seabed, has usually been outside of our reach. So the idea was simple. If we put something down there, no one is going to reach it. And that was kind of erroneous with time evolving, because we discovered that it was not true. So we arrive where we are. And where we are is that 43 nations have developed a submarine fleet with around 505 submarines operating all around the world. We're talking about SSK, that means diesel electric submarines, SSN, a nuclear submarine, SSBN, that are part of the nuclear triad that is crucial for nuclear powers. And some of those nations have developed capabilities in order to reach the underwater, to reach the seabed, and to disrupt the infrastructures on which we depend. And so that's where the strategic competition started. Let's just point some cases, because it's not only about security, it's also about safety. November 2022, an underwater volcano just erupted. It was nobody's fault, I hope so. And the effect was that Tonga remained for several weeks without internet, because the explosion severed the underwater cables. And it was required a high level of technology with support of the different navies, including the US Navy, to conduct the operation to reconnect the island. But something else happened in April 2023. Matsu Island, that is part of Taiwan, substantially, the Republic of China, was severed from all connections because a merchant vessel just dropped its anchor in the wrong point and severed the two internet cables that connected Matsu Island with the mainland, with, in that case, Taiwan. And for several weeks, Matsu Island was completely without internet. That means no communication, and from a military perspective, it means no command and control. It means being not part of an integrated military device, and that's gonna be a problem if you need to defend yourself. Well, you will say, well, that's just two unfortunate cases. It happens. Well, between 2018 and 2023, it has happened in the same sector, the Indo-Pacific, at least 27 times. So that's kind of what we're talking about. Because if a merchant vessel can cut you from the world connections, you are doomed. And if you are doomed, you are kind of need to develop capabilities to counter this threat. And we understand it very clearly, at least in NATO, after what happened with the Nord Stream 1 and 2 and the Baltic Connector. By the way, we have talked extensively, the professor has done, on domain. Let's set the record straight concerning the military perspective. In NATO doctrine, we have just 5 domains: land, maritime, air, space, and cyberspace. It's a problem of doctrine substantially, and so far underwater has been part of the maritime domain. A big issue, what happens on the surface is completely different of what happened under the surface. That means that under the surface, physical and chemical condition, and specifically pressure, implies that no radar can operate, you cannot use infrared lights, and so on and so forth. And you have really specific conditions. That means that the only means that you can employ to just communicate or simply understand where you are or where you're going is sonar, so sound. And that's kind of also of a problem, because when you have not personnel on the asset that you are deploying, you need to have a connection, or on the other side, you need to have a system that is autonomous, so it can conduct its task and complete its mission without any support. So when we talk about underwater in the military sphere, we use this not term, that is, the underwater is an almost domain. Because we are discussing, there's been discussion about how to set the underwater and this role in strategic competition, the development conducted to deploy capabilities in the sector and the scientific development, including, as I said, autonomy, which means AI implementation, in order to define the underwater under a military perspective. So we have said where we're coming from, where we are, and where we're gonna be. Well, there are some more problems. I'm sorry to point out always problems, but the fact that the underwater is so specific means that we can do interesting things in the underwater. First of all, we can explore it. Second, we can create more infrastructures. And so far, we have just made connection, our oil and gas pipeline, power line, telecommunication cables. But we can do more. We can put server down there, because we have problems of temperature for server farms, specifically in the north, where some server farms are kind of contributing to climate change. So why not putting them down there? But if we put them down there, it means we have to defend it. And someone is going to try to spoof them, to mine them, to disrupt them, or to destroy them. And more, we have kind of discovered, although I totally agree with the professor about the fact that we do not have specific numbers on that the seabed is kind of full of critical minerals for green transition and digital transition. Just a few elements. In the seabed is estimated that there are 21 million cubic meter, 21 billion tons of manganese nodules, 1 billion tons of cobalt-rich crust, and 100 million tons of polymetallic sulfides. All these are crucial, and the best projection talk about that by 2030 there will be nearly a 10% capability for global minerals coming from the underwater, especially concerning cobalt, copper, and zinc. That means, which is, I come back to the economic matters, that around this sector will develop kind of 10,000 billion euros. So it's where someone is going to try to get there. But if the growth of today will not be the grievance of tomorrow, that's kind of something that needs to be regulated, but also to be defended. And we are gonna go in that direction, because the more and more we depend upon the underwater, the more and more it is required to have capabilities to surveil constantly these infrastructures. So we're talking about ISR, intelligence surveillance and reconnaissance capabilities in the underwater that especially are persistent, and to be prepared to deter and counter those actors that employing specific technologies are going to try again to spoof, disrupt and destroy those infrastructure in order to attempt to our security. Thank you. And looking forward for questions.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. And again, we saw how we are covering the same space and seeing just another angle, which gives us more food for thought and more makes just shows how complicated the argument is. That each facet of it has persuasive arguments, but sometimes they clash. The legal side clashes with the geographical side, and the geographical side clashes with the defence and security aspects. And now we're going to have another facet, and as Professor Giordano mentioned, there's a geographic reality is what it is, and whereas the geopolitical is what you hope it will become. And so we're going to hear about that geopolitical side by Mr. Antonio De Ruda, who is a docente and analista of geopolitica digitale. Thank you, Antonio.
Well, thanks for first. Thanks for the invitation, and hello everyone. I studied the intersection between internet technology and geopolitics, so I just would like to give my 2 cents on this. And 3 main points coming from a lot of inputs that I heard from the panel. First point, when we talk about the Montego Bay Convention, well, we should remember, we should recall that the Montego Bay dates back to 1982. And I think that most of the people here in this room now were not born. And, but most of all, internet was not born. So we have a convention that includes no refer to the technology that has changed the world we live in. Okay, so this is the first, I think, gap that we have nowadays in the regulation. And so as we know, the Montego Bay is more focused on the traditional maritime issues like fishing, like territorial disputes, but has nothing on, again, the main technology of the world. And it's very vague. And we know, as Professor Giordano told us, when the rules are vague, the geopolitics arrives, So that's the first point. I think we all should work on this gap that today we have in the international legislation. Starting from this question, can we have right now a legal framework that doesn't cover the internet technologies? Is it possible or not? Second point, internet. Another question, can we consider internet nowadays a universal or a common interest of all the world? Well, answering this question, 10 years ago, my answer would have been yes, definitely. Internet is a universal, thing. It's for all. Love and peace. If you ask the same question nowadays, I say no, it's not. Internet nowadays is shifting. We are living a very interesting phase right now because we see how the perception of internet is shifting from something that was universal to something that nowadays is more considered as national. And so when Professor Caracciolo said, look, the freedom, the concept of freedom in the water it can be very different. Well, even the concept of internet implies a different perception of this freedom. And third, and my last point, from international point of view, let's go to the European point of view, European level. Because it's important. As far as we all know, and the panel, highlighted at this point, we all know that nowadays it's very hard to reach a consensus at international level now, to develop new rules. Well, why can't, or maybe just, can we think about working at least at European level in order to develop a legal framework that can be taken as a model, even at international level? It's just a question. The problem is that if we see the recent stances, the recent position of the European institutions on this problem, and take, for example, the latest recommendation of the European Union on the security of the internet cables that was issued on February of this year. Okay. It contains 3 main points. First, it says, I read what the recommendation says, improving coordination between the EU members to manage and protect submarine cable infrastructures. Okay, so first point, improving coordination. But as we know, every recommendation in the EU says, the first point, we should work on more coordination. So, first point, let's go. Second point, enhancing governance, so strengthening governance structure to ensure the security and resilience of submarine cables. Okay. Third, we have to find money, increasing funding to build new cables. There's nothing in 12 pages of the recommendation, there's nothing about standards, rules, at least among European countries. So, given the difficulties to reach consensus at international level, I think that it could be a good way to go ahead by working at least at European level. But so far, I don't see any intention, but I give the floor to the speakers if maybe they have other signals on this regard. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It might be a good time before we probably do another round of our speakers, but in between, are there any of the representatives of the embassies that would like to make some comments or ask some questions? And then after we do a round of the embassies, we'll maybe ask some questions from the students, and then we'll come back for another round from the panel. So, Canada.
So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation, and I don't have a message from the embassy. We are here just as, guests, but one thing that comes to my mind listening to these presentations is that when we talk about bilateral and multilateral cooperation, one of the things we have to bear in mind, I think, is that we need to cooperate to improve the level of education of our students in our countries, because these are so fascinating questions, but extremely complex. And what was very interesting for me was the different aspects and standpoints. I mean, we have a legal standpoint, international law, we have the military analyst, we have the digital component, we have geography, physical and human geography. And I think that even though our capabilities in terms of technology are skyrocketing in the last 20 years, I would like to have more people, more analysts and scholars in the future coming from our countries on all of these subject matters. And I think we could do a wonderful job by improving cooperation in education, trying to improve the meritocracy, etc., because we really will need a lot of knowledge to face complex problems. This is my personal opinion. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. And we, in our little part here today, are trying to contribute with this interaction between students and our learned friends in the panel to this type of development. And the festival has been doing that for 15 years, and it's good to see one of our Commonwealth countries make a comment like that. We have some other embassies here. Any other comments from them? Norway?
Yeah, so thank you so much for the invitation. We don't have a certain message from the embassy either, but for us, as you might know, it's really important with the oil and gas resources. So we have had different bilateral agreements with different countries in the past with regards to agreeing on the deep sea borders. But for us, it's also really important to take into account the climate change and also the common interests of mankind. So it's really about finding a balance between those interests and not exceeding or exploiting the resources on the deep sea. So I think that is really important, and we really need to continue on both the bilateral and multilateral cooperation with regards to that.
Thank you for that comment. Yes, I think there are obviously important aspects that sometimes clash with the will of different countries to, it's how much we care and the common interest against how much we care for our country and our own interests. We have the representative of UAE here. Would you like to comment?
Thank you for this information, and this is a really important topic to talk about. As you see now, many problems in the world because of the underwater borders and state domains. And I would like to have more of these things discussing between countries and people to make clear about this topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. Any Flanders Trade Office? We have the
Yes,
we
good
have
morning.
a trade interest here from
Trade
Flanders.
interest, but I also represent Belgium. Thank you for the invitation. I think it's highly important to discuss this kind of topics more and more because in the end, Earth is a blue planet. People tend to look at the sea from Earth, from the land side, but I think that awareness is really very important. I think that my colleague used a very correct word by using awareness, because population needs to be aware that our planet consists of 70% of water, so everything related to the blue economy comprising the underwater domain is highly relevant. We should look at our planet from a seaside point of view. I have no specific message to bring. Belgium is, of course, a host to NATO institutions, EU institutions. Brussels is the second place in the world with the highest concentration of lobbyists. So my only message is please keep on organizing this kind of events, because I think that awareness is crucial. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Bahrain? No? Is Greece here? Greece was meant to be here? No? All right, well, that at least gives the students some idea of who are some of the other embassies that are here, and opens up the possibility to ask either questions to generally to people in our panel who have spoken, or to some of these representatives if you have a question that may be more specifically somehow involve one of the countries that are here. So we have, yep. Can you introduce yourself as you...
Sure. Okay. First of all, thank you so much for this very interesting presentation. My question is next. I want to know, how does the international law regulate underwater borders during the wartime? That is my question, because as you've mentioned, underwater borders are not very clear due to various of issues, one of them being climate change, and especially if the countries are economically connected, like through a pipeline, the gas or oil. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think we'll call on, we'll go one question at a time, but I'll call on both the legal and the defence answer that, and we'll start off with Professor Kretschmer.
The UN Convention on the Law of the Sea doesn't make any distinction between peace and wartime. It is obviously, it is thought as a peacetime convention, a peacetime treaty. But since borders, underwater borders, once they have been established, they are there, or because they have been established directly through a treaty, a bilateral one, maybe a trilateral one, or by judgment by an international court or tribunal, they remain as they are also in wartime. The problem when we don't have a border, because we have in many oceans and seas, not a complete system of borders. The lacuna is the same for peacetime and wartime. The absence of a treaty is rather critical. We have seen that in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, where we have many claims, overlapping claims from different countries, which try to maintain negotiations among them, but no clear border, underwater clear border, and also in the water column. The problem is this kind of lack of border established by consent by states poses the same problem in peacetime and wartime. What can we have in wartime? We can have in wartime that the sovereignty over over a territory changes because of the war. This is, in international law, an illegal acquisition of territory. No other state can sustain it. There is an obligation erga omnes to not favor the crystallization of illegal territorial situation. And even in minor aspects, in case of illegal acquisition of coastal territory, the rule applicable is that the land dominates the sea. So if you have a maritime facade, you have all the maritime spaces of this maritime facade, so internal waters, territorial sea, and continental shelf, and EEZ. This would be an illegal acquisition of territory, so the exercise, for example, of sovereign powers within the continental shelf could be contested by other states. Claims and contestations are, of course, the tools through which react to an illegal land situation which has an impact on the maritime side of the maritime territory. Allow me to use this term if it's a very wrong one. It's not a good one. But let's say to the domains, state domains at sea.
Well, Manuel, if you could just put the defense side.
Definitely a challenging question. First of all, because you use the term wartime. So when we are in wartime, because usually countries in the 21st centuries do not declare any more war against each other. They conduct special military operations like Russian Federation in Ukraine. So it would be already when we're talking about that. Overall, two perspectives. First, if we suppose we are in wartime, so by the way, I put aside how we define when we are in wartime. Usually we would apply international humanitarian law and specific law of armed conflict, and translating what is considered as arbitrary in the maritime domain. So a submarine is a boat, and when it is rendered inoperational, so it's no more effective, and well, let me be quite realistic. If a submarine is no more operational, it goes down, pressure goes up, anyone inside die. But let's suppose that in some way they survive, so the submarine goes up, you should theoretically save them. So that's kind of the perspective. So a translation to what operates under the sea to the what we usually consider arbitrary in the maritime domain operations. The other perspective, and I come back again to the concept of wartime, why we operate underwater, why our adversaries operate underwater, because of plausible deniability. Because when you operate under the waves, you have the same problem that I said during my first speech. So you can't see. You do not have a radar and say, well, your boat was there. You may use sonar system, the well-known SOSUS to cover the JUCAP by NATO, but it's always difficult. Of those 27 accidents that were registered between 2018 and 2023 in the Indo-Pacific, who was responsible? The Latin question, cui bonus, or who earned from that? Well, it's quite difficult to say, okay, it was an accident, it was an action by an actor. It's always a covert action. And they always try to conduct this kind of operation in order to generate effects within the gray zone and not being held accountable of that. And even in wartime, it would be difficult to hold someone accountable because it would be difficult to say, yeah, you do that, you did that. Well, how do you say that? So the intrinsic characteristic of military operation in the underwater domain means that it's extremely difficult to apply any kind of rigid consideration and law to what has happened there. I hope I've some way answered.
Specify, and just to highlight how perspectives are different. In international law, we have a very clear definition of war since 1899, so not yesterday. So we have a definition of international armed conflict, and for that definition, we don't need any declaration. We need, you know, international law is based on effectiveness. So if we have an effective situation of fighting, we have, well, plus other characteristics I'm not speaking about now. So we have a definition of international armed conflict given by the most recent one by the Fourth Geneva Convention of 1949. We have two definitions, maybe even three definitions of non-international armed conflict. So we, given by the Geneva Convention of 1949, Common Article 3, and then the second additional protocol of 1977 to the Fourth Geneva Convention, and also by Article 8 of the ICC statute, the Statute of International Criminal Court. So for international lawyers, and indeed if you think about the recent development, you don't hear international lawyers speaking about, because for us we have one category. Wars of attack is prohibited by a jus cogens rule. Full stop. We don't need any other thing. Then we have the violation, but the war goes on. So we have a very elaborated set of rules disciplinating what's a warship, merchant ship status in wartime, because they can carry on products useful for the war. So we have another detailed set of these rules. So under our point of view, we don't have any doubt, because the rules are clear, and I must say that the last advisory opinion of the ICJ concerning the situation in Gaza Strip is a manual of international humanitarian law, perfectly delineated. I think myself is not anymore necessary to have scholars writing a book, because the book is there in the advisory opinion by the ICJ. So just to highlight the different perspectives, so in some case for scholars to find an answer is easier than under a political point of view. Thank you.
So,
Professor Giordano.
Yeah, thank you. About the cartographic side, normally the International Cartographic Union followed the rule of the international law. So when you had the occupation of Russia in Crimea, the International Cartographic Union followed the rule of the international law. But normally the general public, what to do? They just look at maps on Google Maps. But if you search on Google Maps, you connect from Russia, and of course Crimea is Russian. If you connect by Ukraine, Crimea is Ukraine. But if you connect from other countries, we don't know. So there is an interrupted line. So your idea, your geopolitical idea, is made by cartography, which is a fake cartography, normally, if you don't follow the rule. But how many of you follow the rules of the official cartography made by official union of cartographers? Quite nobody, because you use normally tools every day like Google. And Google Maps solved the problem very, let's say, Solomonic way. Okay? This was the reality. Please.
Thank you. That's another aspect always to keep in mind. Other questions? All right, we'll go to this side now. That's okay. We'll go here, and then we'll come back here. Good.
Yeah.
So thank you for your presentation. So I have two major questions. I think the first one is going to relate a little bit all the different aspects and that we've been talking about, and it's what happened with the cultural heritage that we find underwater. In this case, something that is happening, for example, the Galeon San Jose in Colombia. So in this case, just for context, also for my colleagues, the Galeon San Jose was a boat right from the Spanish Empire. It's there, but Spain claims the boat. However, it is not very clear what is going to happen with what was inside. We touched before some topics about the native people. They claim they're part of it. What happened in these cases? And not in this case specifically, I wanted also probably to hear, since obviously colonialism in general can obviously affect the way we divide the cultural heritage that is underwater. And well, just as an extra question and very trying to be very efficient, I was wondering how the underwater military concepts that you mentioned before about building more internet connections, etc., aligns with the sustainability that we are trying to maintain in the 2030 agenda, or even further in this century. Thank you.
Who'd like to take that?
So, cultural heritage. I know of San Jose because I was in Colombia for some conferences, lectures in July, so I was told about this galleon. Well, let's say that the UNCLOS applies to cultural heritage the same mechanism it has established for all human activities at sea. It depends on the maritime zone. So up to 24 nautical miles off the coastal state's coast, the coastal state exercises sovereignty and or control on cultural heritage in these areas, independently from the origin of this heritage. A Greek statute, Italy has a lot of problem, of course, Mediterranean countries, usually because vessels navigated during the Roman time, frequently from Greece, from Northern Africa towards Rome, the capital of the empire. And from 24 miles off, nautical miles off, no rule, so in the continental shelf and or EZ, the coastal state has not any control, sovereign power, jurisdiction on cultural heritage by UNCLOS. Strangely as it can be, again we have rules on cultural heritage in the deep seabed area. So beyond 200 nautical miles. There is this sort of gap between 24 nautical miles and 200 nautical miles. Indeed, a convention was concluded on that to integrate the UNCLOS. And this convention was adopted under the auspices of UNESCO. It's 2001, was adopted in 2001. And it is a convention devoted on cultural underwater protection of underwater cultural heritage. not many states are states parties. It depends on their interests, if they have continental shelf rich not only in gas, oil, but also in cultural heritage or not. Many Mediterranean states are party. In this case, the approach of the convention is not this is yours, this is mine, but it's cooperation between the involved states. Italy had a case with Tunisia, and this was one of the first case of full cooperation on these ancient vessel, Roman time vessel. So both states organized the protection, the maintenance together through cooperation. And there is also this idea that the protection is better guaranteed in situ. So without removing the wreck, which can damage the wreck, and so on. So in that case, Italy and Tunisia are cooperating, but they are both states parties to this treaty. So everything depends on the locus, the place where the wreck or well, there are specific rules for warships, because there you have the problem of cemetery for those staying on board. The soldiers died, so there we have different rules.
If I may add something on this point, of course, this is an international law problem and a cooperation by states primarily. But there is also a new field of discipline by scholars, which is called legal geography, which connects geography with the legal, historical, and anthropological frameworks. So it's also important to see how scholars are trying to put in the international cooperation, international laws, this concept to respect history, respect space, and respect the space where these things happens. So some things are changing. So also in the study, legal geography, which is a connection between lawyers or let's say people studying history and geography, is melting in this kind of new view of the world.
Thank you. We need to okay, the second question of
just to address quite briefly the question. The main topic is how industrial seabed industrial development affect the deep biosphere. When we talk about cables, oil and gas pipelines, and power lines, usually, or until now, we do not have any scientific evidence that they affect the biosphere. They have been, as been said, there are some hypotheses that have not been proven concerning the effect on the echolocation of underwater mammals, dolphins, and so forth. But that's kind of the impact. When we talk about a line, we talk about something that is just put on the seabed or a few centimeters if we are in a sandy seabed. So it's not just kind of great effect. Totally different if we talk about the effect of servers, if they are put down, or any other infrastructure that generate in a concentrated way on high rising temperatures that may generate, change the situation, and that's kind of a topic that has been discussed by scientists. And even more problematic is concerning deep sea mining, because the technologies that have been developed so far, and Norway is at the forward edge in the development of deep sea mining technology, have kind of a problem that when they attack the seabed, as it's told, they generate, they move substantially the minerals and all the sand from it. So they generate a chemical environment that is not quite conducive to life in the near term. So the industrial and scientific point of view are trying to work together in order to limit the damage. Because, as I've said before, if the growth of today will generate the grievance of tomorrow, it's going to be a problem. And right now, there is a 600 billion euros fishing industry all around the world, so they have to be balanced.
Thank you. what we'll do now is we're going to have another round of our speakers, and I'm going to ask the speakers to leave us with a thought in relation to this, but what we'll do is we'll take these last one question from each side still, and then as the speakers do their last round, if whoever can answer these last two questions, do that as well. So,
if I may, first of all, I do apologize. I left the room for a while earlier. Maybe I have one question that I don't know that it has been already raised. On the 14th of June 2021, Italy authorized the creation of an exclusive economic zone. So this is of paramount importance in the West Med. I know that some negotiations are underway with some coastal, let's say, neighboring states. And so I would like to profit from the occasion to have in the room Professor Caracciolo, but also the Presidenza del Consiglio, to have maybe the latest concerning the state of the art of these negotiations. Thanks.
Well, of course, I counsel for many years the Italian MFA, but now, of course, for conflict of interest, I cannot anymore being an international judge. But of course, I follow from the outside the ongoing in the law, the sea concerning Italy. Let's say the Mediterranean Sea is a small sea with a very peculiar geographical characteristics, two big islands, Sicily and Sardinia, and some small islands around Sicily and around Sardinia. Sardinia put there in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. So while on the Adriatic, more or less, independently from the establishment of the exclusive economic zone, the continental shelf had already been delimited. Most of I think all thanks also because of the political situation and the existence of Yugoslavia, so a big agreement in the 60s between Italy and former Yugoslavia. In the western side is more complicated. We have, and southern side is well known that we have difficult geographical situation with Malta, and more recently with Algeria, with France. There is an agreement ratified by Italy but not by France. With Spain, we don't have problem, but so there are very complex negotiations, politically speaking, and also legally speaking. I have my personal ideas, but I won't express them. But they require, these negotiations require attention on the geographical situation. Yes, there could be a final outcome, the submission of the dispute to a judge, but this is also a very delicate decision for a state, because when I was counseling the MFA, I prospected the legal situation, the pros and cons, and then the decision is a political one, cannot that be a political one, because you know, when you negotiate for years and months and years and centuries, at least, you maintain in your hands the case. While you submit a case to a judge or a conciliator or arbitrator, you defer the case to an independent structure, so you don't maintain anymore the control on negotiation. So to decide to submit a case to a judge takes a long time, and a perspective of failure of any kind of possible negotiations. So it's not an easy negotiation, and the Italian interests are specular to that of Spain, so must be taken in consideration also this one.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll proceed with those last questions. Just one that side and one.
Yes, thank you for this pleasure to be here today. My name is Valeria Donets. I'm actually from Ukraine, and China was part of my interest in the university. So if you allow me to speak about particular cases, we know that China has its activity in the South China Sea, and it's actively building artificial islands, and it has claims within the 9-dash line. So the question is, from juridical and security points of view, how far can it be extended, and like, are there any regulations or limitations about this activity like that are foreseen from the point of international law, because it wants, like China wants to expand its economic exclusive zone to have an access to the resources and other benefits. So the question is how damaging it is for the security in the whole region, and from juridical point of view, how far it can extend and how it can be limited. Thank you.
Question?
Thank you so much. My name is Abir Shorfa. I'm from Algeria. And I think this topic today is really interesting, since Algeria is one of the biggest provider to Europe of gas and oil. That means we have giant pipes that connected both continent Africa and Europe. Thank you so much for the opportunity of being here. It's a bit alarming, to be honest, to hear all this information. Thank you for your interventions. We always heard that the upcoming war will be around water and water resources, but hearing the numbers today hits differently, especially that UN conventions can fail recent conflicts. With due all respect to the efforts made decades away, but we need to work on that immediately. Most of the questions that I had in mind were already asked by my colleagues. I'm happy that we have the same concerns. But I think my next question should be for you, for us to be the future leaders in our governments. What should be our priorities? Is it to define the borders? We already can do that by agreements and law enforcement agencies, or to develop technology for the mapping, or to work on water and water resources conservation to save humankind, as Belgium and the other embassy mentioned. Thank you so much.
Thank you both for your questions, and we'll complete the round, and so maybe you'll make a final comment and include if you think.
Let me tell that, of course, I think you are already on the right track, because when you talk about how we have to perceive the future, you mentioned technology, you mentioned borders. Of course, again, with geopolitical view of the world, it's saying it. We have 70% of the world that is water, and what we call Earth, because we have in mind our reality, but the world is different from the imagined reality. So I think we have to, in my side, we have to work more, and I'm taking the suggestion of Federico, we have to work more closely avoiding this kind of barriers between disciplines, because this is one of the first problems. And I can tell you in the university it's very difficult to work together with other disciplines. We are trying to do this. And for example, now we started with a new teaching in Lewis that is exogeography, which is the space on the sky, so on the cosmic space. And it's one of the first teaching in Italy, but we are in delay. We don't have so much teaching about the underwater geopolitics. We don't have so much, yes, we have international law, scholars, but we don't have specialization on some part of this knowledge. And I think as a university, we are very in the way to teach new things and to interconnect disciplines. This will be the next challenge, to avoid be in some kind of, let's say, divided rooms. This kind of discipline, this kind of discourse is starting, but if you want to have a reality on the world for your work, we should take, let's say, a more comprehensive knowledge. But this is already in your generation. I see with the students. We are coming from, let's say, specialization. I am a security analyst, I am a geographical analyst, or I'm lawyers. This is old in the world. So we should work together, and we have to do new kind of visions.
Mr. Panera?
Yes, as Professor said, multidisciplinarity is at the core of both questions, because when we talk about the underwater, as we have said before, we do not know enough about the underwater. We do not have the right resources right now, or we are really stretching down the line in order to completely survey our underwater infrastructures. So what we need is more interagency cooperation. And that's kind of a topic that has been widely developed in the Indo-Pacific, and especially in the South China Sea, because what China is doing in the South China Sea is also a part of a wider strategy of influence and control that has expanded also to the Indian Ocean, and that has created concern for India, that has developed the concept of UDA, underwater domain awareness. Really, underwater domain awareness was born in Canada in 2005 by a Canadian Navy commander that developed the first scientific article on the concept of underwater domain awareness. And at the base of it is, first of all, to kind of make transparent the water column. In order to do that, it's crucial to have technological development, scientific development, and cooperation, which means that what is being used by the Navy should cooperate with the information that are developed by the industry, the infrastructures, the underwater, because let's be clear, those infrastructures have sensors made to work them safely, and if they are there, they can be used also to track remotely operated vehicles that go near them, submarines that operate with a malicious intent around them. And also we have scientific infrastructures that have been put to survey mammals, the movement of the earth, and so on and so forth. So the integration of all those in a common operational picture, as we call in military terms, is at the core of how to sustain a more proactive development of the underwater, more rational development of the underwater, at the same time protecting the underwater from those who threat the infrastructure and thus the society. That's kind of the point of view.
Thank you, Mr. Panara. So these questions are raising issues of complexity and reaching out in new areas of study in order to deal with complexities and issues of collaboration. So I think this was very interesting to, I was just about to pass the floor to Mr. Denuta, but he seems to have moved out. Yes, of course, yes.
Sorry, you raised the issue of South China Sea, which was dealt by a very famous arbitral award adopted in 2017, July 2017, by an international arbitral tribunal. The Philippines brought the case before this arbitral tribunal because, you know, under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, jurisdiction is compulsory. So it is possible There is a default mechanism, which is Annex 7 Tribunal. We call it Annex 7 Tribunal because it's established by this Annex 7 to the convention. And so the Philippines could submit the case even without the consent by China, which didn't participate to the case. And the award was an enormous one, more than 200 pages, 300 pages, and it clarified not, of course, issues concerning sovereignty on land territory, because it is a law of the sea tribunal, not having jurisdiction outside the law of the sea, but it clarified very well that the exclusive economic zone cannot be, breadth cannot be beyond 200 nautical miles, from where these 200 nautical miles can be measured, make a very clear distinction of islands and rocks transformed in islands because of activities. So the framework is clear. It was already clear, because the convention is rather detailed on these points, but after this award is extremely clear, difficult to raise doubts or lacunae. The award was also very clear on the protection of the marine environment, because some activities of fishing conducted in an aggressive way towards the fishing resources were considered contrary to the convention, and so a wrongful act, because at the end the judge has to ascertain if an activity is in compliance with international law or not in compliance. In that second case, it is a wrongful act, so compensation and all the consequences connected with the commission of a wrongful act. So thinking about legal leaders, I think that one of the main issues is conservation and protection of the environment, whatever environment it is, and in particular the marine environment and fishing resources. Nobody speaks never ever about illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, which is really a threat for fishing resources, but also for the communities, small communities living with these resources, which are depleted by illegal fishing, which is not fighted sufficiently by the flag states of these vessels. So I think that the protection of the marine environment as such is important, and since we have many times, I have just very slightly mentioned, but this reference to the richness in resources of the deep seabed mining, but we have to think at which costs, because if the environmental costs are extremely high, we don't know well that deep seabed environment, how it is. We know, take into consideration the technology we have nowadays, that the technology is very, it's a very polluting technology. So indeed states are trying to arrive to a moratorium to avoid exploitation. The passage, I don't enter into specific aspects, don't enter the phase of exploitation until more knowledge about this marine environment has not been reached according to the precautionary principle. And we had that incident, Coco incident by Greenpeace, trying to highlight the attention, to highlight the risks connected with deep seabed mining. So I think in the future, states' interests of single state must be always evaluated under the perspective of interest for the environment, the fishing resources, as far as the law of the sea is concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. I must say that the festival, Diplomacy Festival, which does 100 events in this 10 days, certainly hit a very interesting point with this particular event and its composition of the speakers. And I think we all go away from today, if we didn't have an interest in all this, we can take away many points of interest, not only because of the valuable contributions of our speakers, but also because of the comments of the embassies here, and particularly the very pointed questions of students, and seeing that's a theme that came through even from the speakers and the embassies, that we're looking to the future more, we're looking for students like yourselves to resolve some of these problems that are present today. I think an event today in such an inspiring setting such as this is, augurs well for the future. And on behalf of my point of view of the Commonwealth, I'm sort of very happy to have been part of this event today. I think with that, we need to thank our host, Confitama, the Italian Shipping Association, which I imagine is, as even from the question, is very involved in all this. Unless somebody else has something on last minute that's they want to raise, I'll thank you all for participating. Thanks again to the students, thanks again to the embassies, and thanks to our panel of speakers. Let's put our hand together for them.